Act 3. Exterminatus. Chapter 1. A worthy enemy is worth 100 tutors. Ancient Necrontyr saying. Let me state for the record, Ferak Osuaria said, that this is not officially a trial. Can we be executed? Asked Orokin. Yes, said Zubakar, with a note of unpleasant eagerness. Then it's a trial, Trazyn said. In a technical sense, said Overlord Balbec, it is an inquiry. Orokin shot a look at Trazyn, signalled. Look where you have landed us, you crook-backed madman. Madman? So says the delusional fanatic who speaks to illusions. I do not— No, scolded Osuaria. Phileas, activate the signal dampeners. Anything you two say, we shall all be a party to. No colluding on testimony. I would rather collude with the Void Dragon, snapped Orokin. Why not? Said Trazyn. Serpents belong together. Cease! Phileas shouted, slamming her half-moon executioner's glaive on the black stone. This is not a venue to air your grievances. Your petty feud has cost the Infinite Empire dear, in a moment of great vulnerability, and it would have cost more had the Praetorians not been monitoring your movements. I have official powers of law here, granted not by this body, but the Triarch Council and the Silent King. Non-compliance in this inquiry shall be considered an admission of guilt, and in such cases my order has the authority to execute sentence. She lowered her glaive, pointing it at the necks of both Trazyn and Orokin in turn, as if judging the distance of her swing. I have this power, overlords or no, and I swear on the shattered bodies of the dead gods that I will use it. Nod, if you understand me. Trazyn nodded assent, stunned at this brazen statement of power. Clearly the Praetorians had taken a greater hand in council affairs over the last several millennia. Indeed, it was possible that the ring of Triarch Praetorians surrounding the council was not merely to contain the two prisoners, but to ensure this inquiry went as directed. Usually, the Praetorians did not undercut civil authorities so openly, preferring to play their cards close and exercise influence from the shadows. Things must, indeed, be serious for her to step out of line so. Was this the result of his feud with Orokin, he wondered, or linked to the strange absence of High Metallurgist Quelker? Phileas accepted Trazyn's nod and turned to Orokin. For a moment, pregnant with insolence, Orokin did nothing. Then he nodded with excessive sluggishness. What our executioner, our colleague from the Triarch Praetorians has said is correct, said Osuaria. We have had the most shocking reports of malfeasance, things that call into question not only your honor, but your worthiness of overlord rank. Zubakar, would you be good enough to read the first charge? Zubakar, his face sword across his knees, called up a Phosglyph panel and scrolled. It is alleged by honorable parties and witnessed by representatives of the Most High Triarch that Overlord Trazyn of Solemnes and Master Orokin of the Sotek did carry out a private blood feud with one another over 8 millennia, contravening their programming as well as the last edicts of the Silent King. They have broken the peace of the Infinite Empire on numerous occasions, including overriding vassal protocols to allow combat between kin, wasting the resources of His Eminence the Silent King. Most disturbingly, this knowingly occurred in an environment where phased recall was unable to function, leading to the permanent loss of over 3,000 of our subjects, including 17 Cryptex, 124 Lichguard, 300 Immortals, 2,367 warriors, and an estimated 30 Destroyer cult devotees. In addition, 2 ships heavily damaged. Ah, this is absurd, Orokin interrupted. As you say, there has been a feud. No one is denying that, for it was no secret. Indeed, this feud was de facto sanctioned by this very council when we put the matter before it. You declared the Astrarium Mysterios and the Tomb of Nepereth to be the common heritage of the Necrons. Do you not recall? Orokin opened a hand, casting a chrysoprase projection directly from his engram banks. It was Overlord Balbec, who now sat on the council, lying partially reanimated as an adjudicator. The Astrarium Mysterios will be owned by all and none, said the projection. A free object, belonging to he who possesses it. Stealing it shall be no crime, killing for it no sin, and whoever opens the crypt may keep its contents for the greater glory of their dynasty. Stealing it shall be no crime, killing for it no sin, repeated Orokin. So why are we subject to this trial that is not a trial, made to explain actions explicitly allowed under the Council's directives? There was a pause. We are aware of the previous decision, said Balbec. Believe it or not, Master Orokin, but our engrams are just as uncorrupted as yours. But we have also discovered certain procedural irregularities with that verdict, which called the decision into question. Namely, said Osuaria, her tile veil clinking as she leaned forward, we have received an anonymous accusation that the verdict was engineered via timeline manipulation. Ha! Preposterous, said Orokin. Indeed, such brazen rewriting of the timeline would explain why the membrane of reality became so thin on this world, that it became subject to a violent warp incursion a mere 6 decades after the trial. Empyrean beings, here on a council world, a gathering place for the infinite empire, a linchpin of our fragile, still slumbering society. You would not know anything about that, would you, Master Orokin? You flatter me, Ferak, but what you allege is beyond even my powers. Trazyn smiled. Even though it was a lie, it must have stung Orokin to say it aloud. Perhaps so, Osuaria said. But, to avoid any doubt, we have tasked 27 of our best chronomancers to lock the council room's timeline. You perhaps noticed our new mosaic. Trazyn looked down. Indeed, he had noticed the spheres and intersecting geometry that inlaid the floor. As a connoisseur, he could not have missed it. What he had not appreciated, however, was that the entire geomantic design consisted entirely of time tiles. He looked at Orokin, ready to drink in his reaction. An unnecessary precaution, Orokin scowled. Indeed, I am wounded that the Council would credit such scurrilous rumours, but as a humble servant of the Empire, I can lay aside my pride in order to banish even the merest hint of impropriety. And all this, Osuaria continued, not even deigning to engage with Orokin's denials, is mere prelude to the most monstrous accusations. You have caused havoc in the sector, forced an Orc fleet to withdraw and land on a tomb world where we have been forced to deploy our limited military strength and artificially raise half the population from stasis sleep. Your meddling has, all told, cost us the permanent destruction of 69,000 Necrons and incalculable neural damage to the tomb world. Pity you did not foresee that in your zodiacs, Master Orokin. Overlord Trazyn changed the equations when he abandoned the fight in orbit, Ferak. The fault is, and that is not even counting the charges of murder, said Phileas, finger impatiently tapping on the haft of her glaive. Noble Council, Trazyn laughed. You surely cannot charge us with murder. Vassals have no legal status as beings. Destruction of property, perhaps. And though I will admit that Master Orokin and I have made very game attempts on each other's lives, here we stand, more or less whole." "Not with the murder of each other," said Osuaria. "With the murder of High Metallurgist Quelka." For perhaps the first moment in 60 million years, both Trazyn and Orokin's verbal response programs failed. As they met each other's impassive gaze, Orokin shook his head slightly, and Trazyn responded with a shrug. "I," said Trazyn carefully, "I had noticed the High Metallurgist's absence, but believed that he had simply yielded his seat to Lord Balbec due to his superior rank and prestige." "Do not try to flatter me, Archivist," said Balbec. "A century after the Council's original ruling of common heritage, a ruling we have vacated, you should note, High Metallurgist Quelka resigned his seat in order to pursue his own studies on Nepereth and the tomb complex of Sephris. He departed immediately for an expedition, presumably on the world currently known as Serenade." Balbec paused, waiting for one of the accused to volunteer information. "He has not been heard from since." Trazyn tapped his chin, a nervous habit from the flesh times. The murder of a figure holding courtly rank, absent a formal declaration of feud or war, was a serious offence. Wipe out 10 legions of vassals, and the Praetorians would not raise a finger in retribution. But the slaying of an aristocrat, a high metallurgist who possessed rank and privilege equal to a planetary regent, was another matter entirely. "And you say he went to Serenade, Ferak, 8,000 years ago?" "You do not believe, surely, that after a declaration of common heritage, the two of you would be the only ones to launch expeditions?" "I can only testify for myself, of course," said Orokin. "But in 8,000 years of visits to Serenade, I have not encountered the High Metallurgist or any sign of his presence, nor have I detected in celestial trances conducted in orbit any hint of technomancy. But I admit I have been absent from the world more than I have been present. Overlord Trazyn?" "I have found the same," Trazyn nodded. "Millennia of spectromantic bombardments and survey sorties, and I have not seen any hint of our kind, apart from Master Orokin, and due to the unusual sharpness of our rivalry, I kept a high degree of awareness regarding signs of Necron presence." "Typical," sneered Zubakar. "Like the couple of bandits they are, neither saw nor heard anything. The ruffian's code of silence."
"One of you killed him," said Osuaria. "To declare otherwise strains credulity."
"If you believe either of us would consider Quelka a threat," cut in Orokin, "you are sorely underestimating our abilities."
"Why, Orokin," Trazyn said, "I believe that's the kindest thing you've ever said to me."
Osuaria opened her mouth, then saw that the executioner was about to speak.
"Counsel,"
said Phileas,
"may I suggest that if either of them had killed the High Metallurgist, or indeed knew of his disappearance, they would have already accused each other. Indeed, likely the murderer would have already gone through pains to implicate his rival far before this discernment."
"True," said Trazyn, "particularly given Orokin's history with the High Metallurgist. The charges would lay nicely. Would have been quite the checkmate. You've had a lucky escape, Astromancer." "She's right, Osuaria," said Balbec. "These two despise each other, and given their histories, such a despicable stratagem would likely already be in motion."
"Serenade is a dangerous place," said Orokin. "Always has been. Ildari exodites, orcs, even a few humans. Not that they are of any consequence, and Quelka was ever launching into endeavors that were above him."
"Are you saying," started Zubakar.
I am saying Quelka was a fool, a well-known fool, and I refuse to be punished for a limp-fingered meddler getting above himself and coming to a bad end. Truly, I will not even allow Overlord Trazyn to be punished for it, since I will not be denied my rights of feud. He stared. I wish to see his face when I beat him to the tomb. Want him to know that I have bested him.
That may be difficult, said Osuaria, given that Serenade is going to be destroyed.
Chapter 2. History requires two parties, the historian and their audience. Without that, one is just talking to oneself. So, kindly stop screaming, and you might learn something. Trazyn the Infinite, guiding human guests through the prismatic gallery.
Destroyed, said Orokin. Rather than destroy us, you will destroy Serenade. Why?
In all honesty, we had discussed it, said Baalbek. That was my course of action. Should the tomb remain unopened until the Great Awakening, the dynasties would most certainly fall into civil war over its contents. But it is out of our hands now.
We have consulted the Celestial Orrery and the Yithsir, said Phileas. Your intervention on Serenade has changed the planet's fate. Originally, an Imperial cruiser group would have arrived and made war on the Greenskins, the combat rendering the planet so uninhabitable that it would have been abandoned and forgotten. Now, the fleet will arrive to find the Greenskin remnants substantially weakened, and therefore, instead of directing resources for a protracted campaign, it will use them for resource extraction and the further development of the world. Serenade will go from backwater to prosperous hub.
Setting aside the humans' inevitable environmental destruction, said Trazyn, that sounds like a world saved, not destroyed.
In roughly 2,000 years, for unknown reasons, the Imperium will order fleet assets to scour the planet from orbit, cracking its mantle, Phileas said. Given that the humans have unknowingly done this to at least 2 tomb worlds, we well know that even our most solidly built structures will not survive.
An exterminatus, said Trazyn.
Just so, said Phileas. You may have saved the tomb, but not for long.
Orokin said nothing, fingers dancing in calculation on Foscliffe panels.
The next celestial alignment to open the tomb is... He paused. It is during the destruction.
So it will be destroyed, said Osuaria.
Not necessarily, said Trazyn, tapping his chin. An exterminatus is not an instant process. Planets are tough things, not easily undone. Killing everything that lives on them is no problem, but actually burning off the atmosphere and cracking the mantle takes a good while, days even. And the Eternity Gate was significantly underground.
Release me from this farcical trial, said Orokin. I could slip through during the bombardment and emerge another way. Trazyn is, after all, the one who originally stole the Mysterios. He only wishes the tomb's contents so he can hide them away and look at them. He wants to possess the past, not shape the future. Punish him and use me.
Pardon me, Trazyn sniffed. Master Orokin began this feud, and while I would put the contents in a gallery accessible to all, he would use it for his own purposes, might even destroy the body of Nepereth in his researches into energy projection. Punish him.
We have decided to punish you both, declared Osuaria. Zubakar?
To atone for your crimes, the Overlord said, spinning his face sword by the tip. You will enter the Awakened Council service. Both of you will work on Serenade, assisting each other to open the tomb, for however long that takes. You've already opened it once before, and would have succeeded in recovering Nepereth, but for your squabbling. Consider what could be accomplished if you behave like lords, rather than shrieking juveniles. But, Overlord, said Trazyn, we have duties. For the next 1,500 years, you will stay clear of each other and focus on dynastic business, said Baalbek. A cooling-off period. After that, you will reconvene on Serenade and spend at least 1/4 of your time there, working to open the tomb. And let us be exceedingly clear. Your use of forces will be tightly controlled. There will be no attacking each other. Not one Necron is to be destroyed by another in this endeavor. Not one. If we get wind of it— He paused. We will cancel both your reanimation protocols. No resurrection in the forges. No phasing. You will, for all purposes, be mortal.
We will punish you, said Phileas, with each other's company.
And how do you expect to enforce these unreasonable demands?
Said Orokin. Simple, Phileas said, giving her glaive a spin. I will supervise. Chapter 3. While it is true that even the best plans may fail, improvisation has a negligible success rate. Lord Solar Macarius, Collected Maxims. Serenade, 500 years before next tomb opening. The lizard birds collected around the cafe, ducking and bobbing, hunting between the antique cobblestones for scraps of pastry dropped by the off-worlders who stop for lunch or a cup of caffeine after seeing the sights in Settlement Plaza. A waitress swiped a menu at the growing multitude, and they retreated, well used to these sorts of tactical withdrawals. They came out like the tide that used to lap not far from this place, where 5 streets met. Then the back-and-forth dance broke routine, and the lizard birds, startled, tittered in panic and took flight, as if some invisible presence passed among them. They wheeled towards what was once the great ocean, now an empty basin, filled with the long stretches of low-cost habs, its seas long drained. No one paid any heed. The musicians playing next to the cafe, a reed trio blowing a long, slow tune that spoke of island breezes that no longer passed over these shores, kept up their long notes. Before them, a legless string player picked at some kind of lap zither. Trazyn had been standing there watching them for half an hour, when Orokin slid up beside him.
I am surprised you decided to come, said Trazyn.
To their right, the cafe patrons laughed and chatted. A server weaved between the maze of little tables. None of them glanced at the metal behemoths standing a stone's throw away.
Not a bad test run, don't you think?
Trazyn tapped the illusion emitter hanging around his neck.
It does not so much hide us as it bends reality around us. Our own little oubliette, like the death marks.
No, sneered Orokin, annoyed at the simplified explanation.
The death marks are in a pocket dimension. I suspect this device merely bends light and dampens sound by interfering with the crude perception inputs of their simian brains.
Not much difference.
There's every difference. It directly counteracts our images, imprinting on their conscious minds, yes, but put us in front of a warp-sensitive, or if one of these clumsy biologicals bump into us, and they'll see us well enough. This overly dramatic demonstration is a risk.
Orokin, Trazyn chided. It was a tactical necessity to test the technology. Besides, this is a cultural experience. Try to enjoy it. Study these people, and you can get a little perspective on the galaxy.
I do not trust technology that I haven't built myself.
Orokin glanced at the cafe with disinterest.
What is this? The emitter? An artifact I had. I suspect from the old ones, or perhaps— No.
What are they all imbibing?
Ah, said Trazyn. That is caffeine. Ground beans soaked in water, or at least a chemical approximation thereof.
This is ridiculous. Standing here among these biologicals, pretending to be their equals, watching them gargle bean water down their esophagi, swilling it through their fatty insides. Ugh. It makes one ill.
It's a cultural world. One of the nicer ones in the Imperium, in fact.
It's a cesspit.
They stood, watching the musicians. I miss music, said Trazyn. In my estimation, one of the greatest things the dead gods took from us.
We have algorithm chants.
True, my dear astromancer, but can they do what this quartet of poor musicians can? See how the Zitherist sets the tempo, how the others follow. A song no one has heard before, an act of pure creation, yet one that still speaks of what this place once was. Music that invokes the cool island breezes that caressed these shores in centuries past, when the seas were higher. Music that contains memory. Can your blessed algorithm chants do that?
No,
Orokin admitted. They merely reshape the fabric of space-time, transmute matter, and bring objects through the dimensional skin of the universe.
Algorithm chants are useful, and that's why those that know the arcane utterances are part of a select immortal order, while these short-lived insects play for coins thrown by gawping travellers, unvalued even by their own kind.
Trazyn gave a performative sigh. My point, Orokin, is that this place has a memory, a sense of its unique history that transcends the millennia. Look at those carved pillars on the Palace of Justice. Marble, but stained yellowish, carved like great hunks of lizard bone. The script on the street signs, its shape so reminiscent of Eldari runes. This music, recalling seas and lapping waves long retreated. The shore is 10 leagues from here, you know. All of it is the product of the past, a living history. They have taken what they considered worth preserving and carried it forward.
We have history. Better history.
Trazyn turned, gestured for Orokin to follow. We do. Titanic battles, wars across the map of the stars, things these groundling peasants could not fathom. But we also do not change. Our culture is stagnant, frozen, in many ways less vital than these humans. You can feel this planet, can you not? They can feel it. Serenade sings to them.
Is that supposed to be funny?
Perhaps a little. Trazyn reached the door of the great cathedral. After you, colleague.
This is the part where I turn my back and you stab it, surely.
Have it your way, Trazyn shrugged, and passed through the door. But this is our fastest entryway to the Eternity Gate. Shadows seeped down the walls of the cathedral's interior, collecting in pools on the floor. Candles, ranked like men battling in a confused melee, burned before the images of saints, residue from smoke and dissolved wax blackening their golden feet. A pilgrim, head-shaved in a monk's tonsure and clad in the light blue robes of his order, walked a labyrinth in the floor. He stopped to ring a bell and mutter a prayer every time he pivoted in the twisting path. Each whispered invocation echoed, paper dry in the empty space. You see the windows? Trazyn pointed at the stained glass, radiating in the bright morning sun. Each panel charts the history of Serenade.
Fascinating,
said Orokin, clearly unimpressed with this parochialism.
Why are we here? I was given to understand that it was time to start a great task.
It is. This is part of it. See the first? The God Emperor shaping the mountains and islands of Serenade with his very hands. The first settlement ship exiting the Imperium. The angelic Saint Madrigal showing the way to Serenade with her blessed lyre. She is usually depicted with a sword, so this is a regional variation.
Trazyn, warned Orokin. Immortality aside, my time is valuable.
Oh, very well. moving to the interesting part. Here we have the Greenskin War, as they call it. And who, my dear rival, is that in the next panel?" Orokin looked up, dismissing the overlaid data scroll he'd secretly been reading. "No. Oh, yes." Storming through the square, meeting the Greenskin onslaught, were a group of Space Marines, unusually tall and thin Space Marines, their helmets fashioned as leering skull masks. The one in the lead appeared to be some kind of hooded librarian, holding aloft a great lantern-headed staff that the glass orcs recoiled from in horror. "Silver Skull's chapter defeats the orc invasion," Trazyn said with clear relish. "There used to be a statue in the square, 30 ket high. They used to light candles and sing hymns to it. A few centuries ago, the Inquisition got wind of it and did a little cleaning up. Removed it for renovation, where it was never seen again." "You stole it, did you not?" "Well, of course, and I hardly think it counts as stealing if it's my likeness. It's my statue, after all." Orokin snorted. "Worshipping a Necron. Poor idiots. I suppose they have a head start on the rest of the galaxy. The awakening is nearly imminent." There was a moment of contemplative silence. "Did you have a statue of yourself, Orokin?" Orokin stalked deeper into the cathedral. "You are an obscene egotist. I only wonder if any cultures worship you as a living saint or spiritual protector. It is a simple binary question." "Show me what you wanted to show me." Down a staircase, beneath the flagstones of the cathedral, lay the ecclesiarchal crypt. It was the old street level from a millennium before, and its entryway remained familiar in line and arch from that period as well. It was the original settlement cathedral, its whitewashing blackened by mould, and its angelic faces worn to doughy abstractions by centuries of water seepage. Trazyn reshaped the necrodermis of a finger, fitted it into the heavy padlock on the rust-furred gate, and opened it. Flecks of deteriorating hinge rained on the floor, and only a sound-dampening hex cast by Orokin contained the ferrous howl. Inside lay sarcophagi, sculpted with the reposed images of the humans' high priests, hands clasped in pious devotion or clutching ceremonial shepherd's crooks. "Robbing graves now, are you?" asked Orokin. "No one will disturb our workings down here," said Trazyn. "A local variety of acidic mold developed a colony several centuries ago." He wiped a hand along a marble casket and showed the dim luminescence on his fingertips. "Once introduced to human lungs, it takes root and chews them away. Death comes within 5 months. Caused casualty loss rates among the underground workforce to exceed acceptable norms. The administratum was quite upset and barred it." "And you present this culture world to me as such a happy place." "Any place that takes its money from visitors is, to a certain extent, an illusion. Those musicians playing calming music, the server at the cafe, the players at the opera house likely rise at daybreak and rush to work through crowded streets and creaking underground trains. A great deal of labor and suffering is expended to make serenade so enjoyable for leisure visitors, to produce the songs, plays, and devotional art that makes it renowned throughout the system. The leaded glass windows are not quite so beautiful when one sees the black, poisoned fingers of the artisans that made them. Oh, don't trouble me with your sympathy for lesser beings." "Just professional interest," said Trazyn, opening his dimensional pocket and placing a device on an empty altar. "This translation fixer should help us phase directly into this crypt without issue. With the world signal blocking geology, this is the safest place to step in from orbit. The Lord of Antiquity can serve as forward post, as we agreed. I've buried it in a crater on the dark side of the second moon, where it will almost certainly stay undiscovered. Serenade satellites are not suitable for lunar bases, since there are no minerals to exploit. We can use the portals aboard to step in and out from Solemnes or Mandragora as needed, and translate down here to perform our surveys.
And no troops, said Orokin.
Small teams only. We cannot fit any large units through the portals in any case, Trazyn agreed. So, shall we find the gate? They walked in silence for a week, Trazyn dropping signal beacons behind them to keep the way straight. Draining the Oceans had reworked the tunnel network in curious fashions. Collapsed passageways, airtight chambers sealed long ago that still contained the partly decayed slime of ocean environments, centuries dead. Subsurface volcanic activity had narrowed caverns and filled old lava tubes with glassy black rock. Orokin navigated, Trazyn eating through blockages with a hip-slung Gauss flare. At times, they uncovered the fossilized imprints of the giant eels, or a distant ancestor of them, which Trazyn insisted on extracting with a finger-sized Gauss cutter and enclosing in a tesseract labyrinth. And then, while stripping away a plug of igneous rock, an unnatural object tumbled out of the hardened magma. A Necron arm, severed, its third finger still twitching with unlife. Tap, 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 stop. Tap, tap, stop. Tap, stop. "One of your warriors, I think," said Trazyn, holding the dismembered limb to Orokin, who ignored it. "We are close, then. I could sense it." They were. The last time they had seen the cavern, it had been 1,500 years past. It had been underwater then, its floor covered with lattices of coral and flowing kelp groves, the whole of it suffused with the eerie light of the poisoned dimensional door. Now it was all empty darkness, drained and bereft of light, absent the heat and nutrients of the Eternity Gate. All that remained were the twisted bodies of slain Necrons, rusting on the cavern floor. That, and the spiders. They were everywhere, pale and soft-bodied, each one as big as Trazyn's outstretched hand. Webs stretched thick and heavy through the chamber, forming gauzy shrouds on the dead Necrons. Frozen metal arms reached up through the gossamer blanket, like a sea of the damned, the struggling forms of trapped moths tugging the thin blankets of silk in an unearthly movement. "A kingdom of the blind," said Orokin. He advanced, staff flaring to light the way. "Sightless worms, moths and arachnids have formed an ecosystem in this place." "My dear astromancer," said Trazyn, in a sort of kindly patronizing tone, "I did not take you for a student of biology." "Student of flesh forms I am not, but I am a master of technomancy. This wretched society communicates and senses through vibration patterns, and patterns are but algorithmic code of a different type." Trazyn swept his obliterator before him, and panicked arachnids fled from the pool of light. "Are you claiming to speak to these eight-legged horrors, Orokin?" "No," Orokin responded, "but I know that they speak." They walked in silence to the Eternity Gate, its still open doors fogged with webs, and the rock surface behind them blank. "The Mysterios?" Orokin asked, embedding his glowing staff in the floor like a torch. Trazyn extracted it from his dimensional pocket, along with a repulsor cradle. He stooped, joint actuators creaking, and placed it within the cradle, summoning a Phosglyph panel to bring the rig online. The Mysterios came into the air, slow and sure, like a rising moon. Orokin shut his ocular and experimentally swept a hand back and forth, rotating the Mysterios, rolling and adjusting it so he could sense each of its 20 sides directly, fixing it in his neural imager. "Are you sure you need no more ritual objects?" asked Trazyn. "This is enough." Orokin settled onto the floor, legs folded beneath him. "Only silence." Trazyn waited. "This will likely take a great deal of time," continued Orokin. "Do you not have surveys and inquiries to conduct?
or do you plan to stare at me for the next 3 decades?
Provided you do not mind me leaving you alone.
What shall I do without your valuable counsel?
Orokin said.
I will have to enlist a mildly talented cave roach to serve as a replacement.
Use the signal relays when you're finished, said Trazyn, and do not hesitate to signal if you need assistance. Orokin said nothing, shoulders settling, head drooping to one side. Trazyn felt a tingle up his spine and stepped away. He was no stranger to techno-sorcery, but Orokin's mastery lay far beyond any he had seen before. Even with millions of years to study, he could not begin to understand Orokin's power. And though he would not admit it, at Trazyn's core, it frightened him. He retreated from the astromancer, watching as his head lolled backward, mouth open towards the cavern's ceiling. The obuculums on Orokin's headdress began to shine with bale light, and he rose off the floor, steady and immobile as though encased in ice. Perhaps it was the infernal setting that threw Trazyn. Darkness, arachnids, the low forest of reaching arms entombed in webbing. It almost made him abandon his plan. But then, the metal body that encased what remained of his essence cooled the fear, and he reverted to his own nature. He placed the Tesseract labyrinth at the front of the chamber, nestled amid the knots of rusting bodies, and started the timer. The awakened council would not approve, of course, but Executioner Filius would not conduct her first formal inspection for more than a century hence. And, after all, he had warned Orokin to call for help, if he needed it. Chapter 4. Nepereth.
Be silent, chattering fools. Only one thing separates mortals from gods, the terrible gift of death. And these star gods mean to take that gift from us. I propose we do the opposite. Rather than take death from us, we shall give it to them.
War in Heaven. Act 4, Scene 1, Line 3. Orokin floats in the womb-like trove of data, has existed there so totally, so long, that he must check his chrono-positioning. 66 years. A good amount of study, enough time to truly delve into the secrets of the Mysterios, but also 13% of their allotted time.
Do not worry, Vashani says. It is time enough with a guide.
Orokin's spirit projection shivers. She does not speak often, but when she does, it flows through him like an injection of fresh reactor coolant, calming him, soothing his racing mind, breaking the circular thoughts that bedevil him day and night. He hates working with Trazyn, resents the council for making him do it. It was all he could do at their last meeting to keep himself from smiting the conceited bastard in his sly death mask. Necrons do not need to smile, were not meant to smile. Yet Trazyn smiled constantly.
Focus,
Vashani chides. He sees her fully now, in his peripheral vision, floating beside him in her own transposition. Orokin would work with Trazyn, provided he could continue communicating with one of the greatest minds in all the galactic epochs. Orokin could tolerate an oath, if it meant he could tap into such transcendent genius. The years divorced from the Mysterios had been hard. That first millennium where Trazyn and Orokin had parted to cover their dynastic duties, and the Council kept the Mysterios, had tortured him with the separation. He dreamed of her in trances, as far as a Necron could dream, but recalled nothing when he roused himself. Could not even recall what she had looked like. Her essence was tied deep into this creation of hers. And he could sense her mind at work on the Eternity Gate, though it had taken long decades to coax her data phantom from the Mysterios.
You built this in order to keep the tomb a secret?
He asks, his body floating behind him, tented by cobwebs, does not speak. Only his astral algorithm. The chamber remains silent.
Correct,
she responds.
You built this astrarium, this device that only opens once an aeon, so that only a kind as long-lived as ours could discover the tomb.
Correct.
Yet encoded it with glyph data the Eldari and the Old Ones could not decipher.
Correct.
And this gate, he says, is now dead.
Correct.
But it can be reset by reverting the Mysterios to its previous polyhedral shape.
Incorrect. Reset logic.
Orokin grunts, takes a long, slow breath in and out. Unnecessary, even clothed in his metal form. Still a good way to center his mind. The data phantom of Vishani occasionally spoke wisdom, even seemed to react directly to Orokin, guiding him, assisting him. Ask direct questions, however, and it reverted to a binary logic protocol. Useful, but deeply frustrating. He resets, asking the chain of questions from the beginning.
The gate is now dead.
Correct.
The gate will be usable again.
Correct.
He pauses, considers.
Lock logic chain.
Logic chain locked at answer to gate usability. Proceed.
There, he thinks. No more backtracking, or else he has locked himself into a chain leading nowhere.
This gate will be usable in less than 500 years.
Incorrect. Reverting to locked chain.
This gate will be usable in more than 1,000 years.
Correct.
And then, a breath in his mind. A number. That push from whatever part of Vishani remains, or whatever image of her his neural engrams have created.
This gate will be operable in 2,367 years,
he says.
Correct.
Well after the Exterminatus, when Serenade would be destroyed to the point that the Eternity Gate would be damaged and non-functional.
The Eternity Gate can be moved and remain operable.
Incorrect. Reverting to locked chain.
But there is another gate.
Correct.
There are 3 more gates.
Incorrect.
2 more gates.
Incorrect.
There is only one other gate. The failsafe.
Correct.
He sits with that a while. If the gate took so long to reset after being fired, the failsafe likely opened earlier. But would it happen before the planet was destroyed?
You have left a way to help me find it.
Silence.
Vishani, is there a signature? A signal?
Silence.
I will help you, Orokin, but you must open yourself to the universe.
I do not follow.
You are closed off, Orokin, alone, have spent long epochs developing only yourself and disconnecting all you consider a distraction.
It is the path of the cryptic to be cloistered, removed in study and self-cultivation. A garden without walls
will be strangled by creeping vines, I know. But a garden closed to all, padlocked in a box, dies. Without rain and sun to feed it, without wind and insects to carry pollen, it cannot thrive. Have you forgotten these things? Clapped in your metal body, have you forgotten the meaning of our philosophies, and stuck only to the letter?
If I open myself, Orokin says slowly, I risk diffusing my power, becoming weak. When I shared my visions freely, they persecuted me for it, turned away from my warnings, trusted the dead gods and lost their souls, then hunted me and brought me to the forge in chains. Now, they do not even remember it.
The Catan have much to answer for, as does our own species. We shattered the star gods, chained them, made them no better than beasts of burden, and our species has spent eternity as soulless wanderers, Only you and I, Orkan, have tasted what it is like to be free of captivity. But you cannot be free when you are your own prisoner.
I am not closed off. I have opened myself to the vitality of the cosmos, drinking in the energies of...
And you have never been more powerful. Orkan goes quiet. Orkan, open yourself and I will show you a vision. Open your consciousness.
Why do you speak like a living being at times, and others like a simple program?
Because the questioning program is not me. It is my consciousness in the Mysterios, the personality emanation that I included to help seekers like you. This voice you hear, it can only be detected on this planet.
Why?
Because I am here. When I completed building the tomb, my dynasty sealed me inside.
Trazyn closed the massive tome, disintegrating pages, sending up a sandstorm of foul dust as it creaked shut. Mites ran in panicked flight throughout the binding.
No, not good enough. Must go earlier, I think. Coloma, please find me earlier volumes of They Drank the Seas. A copy from before the Inquisition censored Chapter 2. And anything you can find on subterranean building projects in the...
Lord, replied the ancient knight librarian. He stooped, spine bent from decades of pushing carts and shelving great volumes.
Yes, librarian?
I'm sorry to say this will be my last night with you.
Trazyn looked up.
Oh, really? So soon?
I had mentioned to you 2 years ago, my lord, that I was scheduled to be forcibly retired.
But I paid for those augmetics, the hip and leg, the juvenats to keep your body together when it started to deteriorate.
That was 30 years ago, my lord. I have grown old in your service, and it is not a question of willingness. Younger men in the librarium wish to move up, and they cannot while I hold my post.
I see, said Trazyn, looking the elderly knight librarian up and down. He had not noticed in his deep focus, but he saw the truth of it. Coloma's skin was parchment thin, his gait unbalanced, as his one fleshy leg had withered due to the strength of its metal mate. He wore a back brace laced over his yellow robes. Brown eyes misted with cataracts, the right one so thick it was like the pupil peered through a sheet of vellum, regarded him with pained regret. How old had he been when Trazyn first brought him into service? 25? 30? Young and vital, that was sure. Quick of mind and strong of body, able to hoist volumes broad as his muscular shoulders and thicker than his forearms.
Well,
said Trazyn.
You had better sit then.
Coloma sat, slowly. Augmetic joints squeaked and stuck. He held his stiff, natural leg out far to one side, wincing when the knee bent slightly.
You have been a good and faithful servant, Coloma.
And you a good master, lord. My treatments, the hemlock close to the library, my children educated in the good scolums, an ash box in the garden of remembrance for my dear Moria. I owe you much.
Trazyn waved a hand, as if dismissing the aid.
Rewards are the fundamental mechanism of good leadership. Any master would do the same.
My daylight masters in the Serenade Central Librarium did not.
No, he admitted.
Yours is a terrorized culture, my friend, and terror breeds obedience, but not loyalty.
I have arranged for my replacement, lord. I have been training him. A good man named Tova. Xander Tova. He will be here to serve you tomorrow night.
Trazyn nodded. You have given him the amulet?
I have,
Coloma confirmed.
The mind shackle scarabs will have implanted themselves already. I saw it in his eyes during the shift change this evening.
And you trained him personally?
He is my nephew, Lord. I have prepared him for his duties.
So the thing was done well, as Coloma ever had. He hoped that Tova would prove as able and enthusiastic, though if Coloma had groomed him, that was a good enough reference. The scarabs would do the rest, though Coloma might have performed just as well without the application of their blunt force control.
I will miss you, Coloma.
And I you, Lord.
You know, of course, that I cannot simply let you go.
A faint flicker behind the cataracts, a rare instance of the scarabs asserting themselves.
Of course not, Lord. I am a liability to your great work.
I cannot promise it will be painless, but it will be fast.
Thank you, Master. My life has been long and happy. I wish only to join Moria in the ash box.
Good, said Trazyn. He may not have been telling the conscious truth, but clearly on some level, Coloma wanted to die. The scarabs had not needed to push hard. Had they done so, they might have killed the frail old librarian, which is not what Trazyn wished. Despite his good service, Trazyn had no desire to carry his body up from the basement.
Do you wish to talk first?
About what, my lord?
This place.
Trazyn indicated the basement stacks, the long shelves where he kept his private desk.
Not just the library, but Serenade. What am I missing?
Missing, Lord?
Do you know what I seek?
My lord, you have not confided, and I have not asked.
Trazyn barked a laugh.
Ha! You are a more faithful servant than I estimated, Coloma. All these years and you have not pried. Good fellow. Good fellow. The truth is, Coloma, I am looking for a tomb, a secret chamber built by my kind.
Do you wish to pillage it, my lord, or worship there?
Both, strangely enough. And for the past decades I have been combing through property records, infrastructure plans, sewer outlays, geological reports, looking for some hint of a structure, either stone that could not be quarried or absent space mankind has avoided. A shadow built around, because your kind finds it too unpleasant. I have found none.
Oh, I'm sorry, Master.
So what am I missing, Coloma? What is it about Serenade that I do not ken? What is the soul of this place? Why does it feel so different?
Ah,
said Coloma.
You're talking about the Song of Serenade.
That tune the street musicians play in the square? The ocean winds they carry forth, the Song of Serenade. That one.
Just so.
Coloma tapped his nose with a finger, a gesture Trazyn found so odd he repeated it, lest it had ritual or cultural significance.
A very odd tune, don't you think? The lyrics are patriotic drivel, of course, but it is quite different from what you hear in the rest of the Imperium.
Trazyn had noticed, he realized. His neural subroutines had flagged it as different than other human music. In the last millennium, he developed a minor interest after stumbling on a ship carrying the Vostroyan Symphonic on a war zone morale tour. Rather than keep them for display, he brought them out of stasis for the occasional concert lineup, programming them alongside a Talan Eremu string soloist and a Tanith pipe and drum corps.
Why is it unusual?
Because it's on the pentatonic scale. It has 5 notes per octave, when the standard scale has 7.
Interesting, though I struggle for the relevance.
Because you have not studied local folk beliefs, and one cannot wonder why. The Inquisition made quite a stink when my grandfather was a boy. They hadn't got around to inquiring about the local culture. Until then, as a small settlement, we were not important enough, I dare say.
When they removed the statue?
They removed more than that. For there has long been a folk belief here that the world of Serenade has a certain rhythm, a pulse that carries through it, through our music, our speech, a thrumming voice. Some called it the hymn of the God Emperor, but others spoke of primordial creator beings living deep beneath the stone. The Inquisition, for their part, replaced all such fancies with the orthodox superstition that it was Saint Madrigal, calling the first settlers to the world, and calling all pious souls to worship the God Emperor through the creativity that makes this world so famous.
And what do the unorthodox say?
There was a sister of Saint Madrigal once, Sister Solarian, a composer and organist of rare talent. Before disappearing, she insisted that the Song of Serenade was so embedded in the culture, in the hearts of its people, because it was embedded in everything. The voice of the Emperor, made into pure numeral mathematics. The same ratio that governed the spirals of a shell, a spider's web, circular vortexes at sea.
A common enough occurrence in nature. Symmetry is—
Forgive me, Lord, but that's just it. Solarian discovered that the Song of Serenade does not form perfect shapes. It's an asymmetrical pattern, but regular, repeating in everything.
Trazyn was quiet a moment.
5 notes, 1 to 5, like a numerical signal.
Precisely.
Trazyn nodded.
Get me everything you can on this Song of Serenade and Sister Solarian. Then go and sit at your desk.
Yes, master,
said Coloma, hoisting himself onto his stiff legs and putting a hand on his cart. Then he stopped, lingered.
My lord?
Trazyn looked up at him, surprised he remained.
Yes?
After my long service, may I ask a question?
Trazyn considered.
You may.
Do you intend to destroy this world?
Trazyn dismissed the Fosscliff panel of research notes, folded his hands, and looked at the diminished librarian.
That's what you want to know?
Yes, it would make my mind easier.
Let me put it this way. I was here when this whole island was a forest, when waves lapped on what is now Embassy Row, a time before pollutants hazed the air and the monsoon rains came naturally, not via cloud seeding. He paused. So, when you ask whether I intend to destroy this world, my question to you is, do you truly need the help?
Coloma hoisted his old joints up, stair by stair, leaning heavily on his book cart as he squeaked through the tall wooden bookcases of the archive, the long-forgotten sections even the Inquisitors had never found. The tomes there were from the high water times, their thick covers and spines bound in hides of extinct whales. He loaded the cart full and wheeled it to the disused shelving elevator, transferred the volumes from the cart to the empty cube, and closed the door. He pushed the button for the sub-basement and watched his last load of books descend to the strange being in the basement, whom he had met 62 years before. A thing beyond time and space, which he had feared at first, until granted the release of the controlling scarabs. Then he went to his desk, sat down and folded his hands, looking at the portrait of his wife, gone over a decade now. When the stroke hit him, it was more painful than anything he'd experienced. But true to the word of his metal lord, it was over quickly. Chapter 5. Music, poetry, mathematics, dance. All are modes of expression. Any one of these things conveys meaning. They are but different languages uttering the same phrase. But if this is true, do not the orbits of planets and stars also join this music? Cannot serenade itself speak to us? Sister Solarian, the music of the spheres. Orican had debated for a great while with himself, but every logical scenario he posited came to the same conclusion. Every zodiac he cast gave the same result. Vishani was correct. To open the tomb, he must open himself.
Very well, he speaks. I am ready.
And so, slowly, he opens a channel in his neural matrix. No mere interstitial message stream, but something far more vulnerable. He deactivates security protocols that keep others from reading his thoughts, widens the narrow beam of information to allow her to slip inside his mind, for them to coexist in one body, able to hide nothing from one another. He has never done this, could never imagine himself doing this. One could become infected with all manner of data plagues. The Flare virus, or whatever contagious psychosis turned Necrons into destroyers. But this is Vishani. She had been sealed away long before such curses came upon the Necrons. And she is brilliant. The thought of that elevated consciousness inhabiting his own neural matrix makes him shiver. Such understanding, such power. To be chosen by that, it was one of the greatest honours of his long existence.
I am ready, he says.
He feels a gentle trickle of data, like a being putting its foot lightly on ice, not knowing whether the thin skin will support it.
Do not be afraid, he says,
not knowing whether he's speaking to her or to himself. He opens the data bandwidth wider. "Orican!" she screams. The shout hammers through the channel, much louder than if she had sent it as an interstitial message, like an explosion going off inside his cranium. It startles him, and he snaps the data channel closed. "Danger," it says. "Danger! Danger! Danger!" Orican snapped open his ocular, his metal ocular, and threw himself to one side, feeling sharp talons rake across his ribs. He grabbed the upright haft of his Staff of Tomorrow, used its solidity to pivot around before hitting the ground in a guard stance. Whatever hit him is gone. Back to the shadows.
What was it?
He asked Vishani. No answer. As if whatever she had witnessed frightened her back into the prison of the crypt. What could frighten an ethereal being? Orican caught movement in his peripheral senses and wheeled, ready to confront the assailant, and realized it was only the drifting shroud of spiderwebs his body was draped with. The irregular spirals of the webs overlaid his vision, but he was not stupid enough to take his hand from his weapon and clear them. Drifting strands lifted in the wind, the ultralight silk disturbed by even the lightest movement of air. What wind? He thought. The thing would have killed him had the realization come even a moment later. He ducked low and turned towards the source of the breeze, the disturbance of air stirred up by the creature coming right at him. He had no time to gather his strength for a strike, only to put his staff between himself and the awful thing that barreled into him with its full weight. Claws, thick as saber tips, scoured furrows in his death mask and tore at his headdress. Mouth-feelers, rubbery and foul, found the spaces between his ribs and slobbered towards his vital systems in search of nourishment. Two eyes, dull red like gemstones, stared out of deep-set sockets. It had all the ugliness of a human, plus the nightmare qualities of various animals. A cloven foot hooked upwards and dragged his staff down. Triple claws slammed underneath his arm and twisted deep in vital systems. Reactor fluid, glowing bright in the near-lightless chamber, dribbled on the black stone floor.
Orokin cast his consciousness backward, seeing the creature retreat, his body pivot, watched its exact path as it melded back into the shadows. He restarted his timeline to just before he had realized that he was covered in webs. And instead of turning towards the drifting strand of webbing, he turned towards the creature, staff drawn back and ready for the blow. It was not enough. The creature was fast. So fast. Whatever biological perception suite it employed was nearly as advanced as Orokin's. The vile alien, for it could not be from this world, went from an oncoming rush to a dead stop within a second, Orokin's sweeping blow passing harmlessly in front of it. Then it pounced, coil spring muscles sending its purple body sailing into the air. There was no time to recover the staff for a second blow. Orokin dropped it. The thing hit him, bowling him off his feet and onto his back. One triclaw speared for his throat, and he evaded. Orokin remembered next to nothing about the being who had been his father. A stern man, quick with the rod, the sun tumours had taken him even earlier than most, long before the immortality of biotransference. Orokin had ever taken a mystic's path, but his family line were warrior caste. His father, therefore, had insisted on sending Orokin to the Temple of the Immortals. There, the war tutors forced him to grapple the other initiates one after the other, shouting correctives at Orokin as his energy waned. It was supposed to build his strength, but it did not. Orokin would never be an immortal. He was small and injury-prone, and was reassigned to the Cryptek Temple within a year. But he had learned to wrestle, and biotransference had given him the strength his old form had so lacked. He rolled, let the triclaw spark off the blackstone. Then he moved fast as a strangling snake, lashing his arm out and wrapping the clawed limb between his upper arm and ribs. He used his body like a lever and snapped the limb, feeling chitin crunch and muscle tear. The mad thing squealed and hissed in pain, its other claws scraping and gouging at him. Barbed feelers covered his face. Already he could feel the trapped and broken arm re-knitting itself, its structure thinning and becoming flexible so it could worm free. Pieces of chitin shed onto the floor. No matter how hard the war tutors trained him, they'd never taught him to wrestle a creature with 4 arms. He felt surface hydraulics tear and spout, sensed the hungry feelers change direction, lapping and sucking at the bleeding systems. Saw his moment as the creature flinched backward, confused at the inedible poisons leaking from Orokin's mauled frame. Then he executed a move the war tutors had never imagined. Holding the creature captive with its broken arm, Orokin formed Zenosh's ballistic parabola with his right hand. A wave of pure kinetic energy slammed the creature into the air. Its body sent into a spin as its trapped arm tore from its body, leaving strands of soft tissue trailing from the chitinous shell. It arced backward, clattering to the floor among the twisted, web-draped wreckage of the Necron armies. Struggled to its feet, began to dart to the side, flanking him.
"I think not," said Orokin, standing.
He raised his hand, fingers splayed as though he were one of the men in the cheap puppet theatres of Settlement Plaza. His crest of operculums glowed bright with ethereal fire, veins of lightning sparking and jumping between the conductive orbs. The creature stumbled, stretched out its hands to catch itself on the dusty floor. A cobwebbed hand gripped its hind leg. Another reached up and grasped the stubby tail. It skittered on the floor, confused, struggling. Rusted skeletal limbs snared its arms and spined ribcage, hands cracking its chitin shell and sinking into the flesh beneath. Tentacle feelers splayed as it shrieked, then it wrapped a rusted arm with its ropey mouthparts, tearing the decayed limb out of its socket. Necrons pulled themselves up from the floor, broken skulls and snapped limbs, crawling with reanimating balefire that flared in their eyes and open mouths.
"What's wrong?" Orokin said,
his scorched pride cooling under the sticky balm of revenge.
"Are we unappetizing to you?"
The creature had only one limb free, not the triclaw, but a 5-fingered gripping limb. Skeletal warriors pulled it closer to the floor, pinning it, biting it with their snapping jaws. An unusual move, Orican admitted, but one with a certain poetic justice. Then he watched as the fingers of the creature's one free hand twisted around each other like a genetic helix, forming a chitinous spike. A new, crooked talon. It plunged into one chewing skull, then another. Spider-webbed hands loosened. Mauled Necrons tumbled to the floor, exhaling the reanimating energy that had risen them. The creature kicked, leaped, dodging and clawing through the forest of reaching limbs, and vanished into shadow.
"I have made a discovery," said Trazyn, slamming the stack of books on the sarcophagus. "You know how I was pontificating on the music of Serenade? Well,
What is this?"
Orican dropped the purple and blue arm on the marble, its dribbling ichor fizzing slightly on contact with the cold stone. Trazyn looked at the limb with a blank expression, though for a moment Orican imagined that he caught a flash of recognition and amusement in the impassive oculars.
"Where did this come from? The gate chamber?"
"It attacked me while I was in my meditative trance, interrupted my focus while I was on the precipice of a great revelation."
"How unfortunate."
Nothing was said, the pause continuing a full hour.
"Well, you don't think I had anything to do with it?"
Another pause. This one 2 hours.
"My dear astromancer, this is the Eastern Fringe, wild space, the frontier. These atrocious little things have been cropping up everywhere. I ran across a nest recently on the unsettled world of Imgal. Genetic thieves, you know. Parasites. They don't bother our kind much, but they're becoming quite common in this area of space. Could be hiding anywhere."
"So you did not collect one, then unleash it in the tunnel network for the purpose of murdering me?"
"Oh, really, Orican, that is too much. And if I had, I would have used more than one. I think you're more than the equal of one of these low creatures."
Orican scried him, his monocular boring into Trazyn like a drilling beam.
"Very well," he said. "As we told the awakened council, this is a dangerous world. Get your illusion emitter. I have been underground too long and wish to get air."
And, as they climbed out of the crypt, Trazyn told him about the Song of Serenade.
"If this is true," said
Orican, his voice rising,
"it means we may be able to capture the signal and follow it to where it is strongest, the reserve gate that I have posited, meaning we can still open the tomb before the exterminatus. Well done, Trazyn."
They came into the shadow-pooled space of the cathedral, and Trazyn froze, still as a statue.
"What is this?"
"What is what?" Orican asked. "Oh, you really must bother to explain yourself, colleague. You cannot simply babble and expect me to fill in the missing numerals."
"Someone," Trazyn said, gesturing to the vaults of the nave, where a group of body-gloved men were removing jagged shards of coloured glass,
"has broken my window."
"Oh, have they?" Orican asked, giving a casual glance towards the vandalism.
"Perhaps they thought it was ugly."